Tonight's Fireside CharLA is brought to you in partnership with the United Latinx Fund and Latino Coalition of Los Angeles. This online event series aims to engage, educate, and advocate on important and timely topics that impact LA's Latinx community during the COVID-19 pandemic and how we can also address local civil unrest due to police violence. My name is Richard Corral, and I'm the Interim Executive Director of the United Latinx Fund. I'd like to quickly thank our sponsors for tonight's event, Southern California Gas Company and JP Morgan Chase, for their commitment to and investment in nonprofits like United Latinx Fund that work to transform, uplift, and improve our community's quality of life. Our program is designed to engage you, our audience, so if you have a question, please enter your questions into the chat box and we will address throughout tonight's program. Also, we are streaming on Facebook Live. So to access the video, please visit ULF's Facebook page and a link will be provided in the chat box. Victor, please go ahead and provide that link to ULF's Facebook page and you can host a watch party. I can see myself here on my phone and I'm going to be inviting friends to join the watch party, and hopefully you can do the same as well on ULF's Facebook page. Tonight, we follow up with our previously featured guests on their proposed programs, investments, and policies that work to address the most pressing issues facing Latinx and other vulnerable communities throughout greater Los Angeles. We will touch upon homelessness, wildfires, digital divide, the census, and reimagining public safety. Let's dive right into our first topic, homelessness, with our featured guests, Sarah Dussault, LAHSA Commissioner and Steering Committee Member for Greater LA, as well as Council President Emeritus Herb J. Wesson Jr. I'm going to start the first question with Sarah and then segue into Mr. Wesson. Sarah, you sit on the Committee for Greater Los Angeles that recently released a report and a framework that tackles systemic racism head on by identifying oppressive policies and frameworks that center on not only marginalized people of color, but also those agencies that for centuries have impacted negatively their lives and their livelihood. It also lays a roadmap for transformation that centers on racial equity across 10 issue areas with goals and policy recommendations for each. Sarah, please share a little bit more about this work and how it has shaped your thinking and priorities as a LAHSA commissioner. Sarah.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here tonight. And I love getting to be on a panel with the Honorable Herb Wesson. That is always a treat. And I love that Alejandra is translating. She's been translating for me at community meetings from back in the day when we worked together in Mayor Eric Garcetti's office when he was council president. So a joy to be here and the opportunity of this report, which we're calling No Going Back LA, and asking folks to take the promise of no going back, is really founded in and was launched by philanthropy. And philanthropy came together and said, let's look at the COVID response and look at how COVID is disproportionately impacting vulnerable communities. And the slides and other things that I can share will show you the death rate that we all know, which is disproportionately affecting people of color, specifically the Black community and specifically the Latino community, and as well as the Pacific Islander community. And so this impact here, this is great. Some of the report we'll go quickly through if you want to go to the next slide. This is our esteemed committee members, and you can keep going. And then these are the 15 issue areas and our 10 principles. And I'll talk about those in a minute. I'll actually go back to those, but if you could keep going. Specifically, keep going. Okay, maybe not. I thought the death rate was in here. I apologize for that.
Well, you know what, Sarah,
so if you want to,
this is the executive summary. I'll pull up the full report.
That's fine. That's fine. I mean, I think we're well aware of those numbers, but they are stark. And I think it's really important to center the work on the fact that this has a disproportionate impact on people of color. And the pandemic, and then the fact of cries for racial justice have helped centered us in what does that mean? And the word recovery is simply insufficient. And so that is why we came up with this idea of no going back and these 10 principles and these 15 issue areas. And specifically what we're saying is, let's not be trapped in the box of current systems or current structures. Let's think outside of those and think of design that creates equity that all of us can feel invested in. Because if you were to design from scratch the homeless services system today, you would not design what we have. And Richard and others on this call know that well. You know, the many layers, the different jurisdictions, the many bosses, and the lack of clarity around accountability. So we call out in this report the fact that we want to end, first and foremost, unsheltered homelessness, but we want to bring programs and housing opportunities to scale. And that means really redressing the past and looking at our zoning history, which was built on the redlining history, which has created a disproportionate impact on people of color and has really shut people out from wealth and shut people out from housing opportunities. So we call it creating an anti-racist zoning agenda. We have a variety of proposals. I'm also want to make sure that we offer up opportunities to anyone who's listening who needs help right now in terms of eviction defense. We want to look at, we're looking at a variety of proposals to move that forward, building off of the work that the City Council and others have already launched. But in addition, it's really about taking a new approach to thinking in terms of the scale of the need, which is we need 500,000 units in our region, and we need accountability for every city in the region to be meeting those goals. And we need to be looking at ways that we can reverse those impacts and of displacement and discrimination and, frankly, unconstitutional housing policies that have created the disproportionate impact of the housing burden on both the Black and the Latino community. So I'm going to stop there, but I welcome questions, but I also just welcome folks to really take a look at the report and to engage and take the promise.
Thank you, Sarah, for providing that very high-level outline. It is a dense report. It does include 10 issue areas with policy recommendations that do go deep and are thinking very systemically about how to address these issues. And I did put a link to the report as well as an opportunity to, and a reminder to take the pledge, because one of the things that I felt very compelled by was that, you know, as folks who have academic relationships and backgrounds, one of the things, the critiques, right, that we always have is that, is this a report that is living, or is this a report for reporting purposes? And my understanding is that there's a very clear and intentional call to engage electeds and leadership that are on the line as we speak right now, as well as community. And so that's, I think, a nice kind of segue to introducing our next guest, which is Council President Emeritus Herb Wesson, who, speaking of taking action and bringing policy to life, actually provided an update to Judge Carter a few hours ago at City Hall. And so, Council President Emeritus Wesson, can you please share a little bit about that update that you provided, specifically around addressing homelessness around the freeways that are within Council District 10, and then how maybe some of these ideas and recommendations around systemic change that are featured in the report may relate to the work that you're proposing in partnership with the judge.
Well, thank you, Richard, for having me. And it's really cool. I think the first time that I did a Zoom with you guys, I was on with Sarah. So, I mean, I am without pause a lucky guy. So here's my 10 seconds on this morning. When I did sit with Judge Carter, we were speaking specifically about a couple of areas in my district and creatively how we wanted to address them with we needed some funding for services and some vouchers, and also I let him know that we were just about at a place where we were going to acquire a motel close to the area. I just got word not too long ago that that was approved, so I'm optimistic where we are where it relates to this area in particular, which is close to my district office. The other area is by Kaiser Permanente Hospital on Cadillac. Yeah. But I want to, if I can, just speak a moment to some of the things that Sarah said. She talked about systemic issues, and we focused primarily on homelessness, and then she also took advantage of the illumination on the flaws in our health system by referencing COVID-19. I think we have to, number one, realize that, and Rupert could probably speak a little bit to this, that's the judge, because he's been around the block a few times like me. I want to say to all of you that I have never seen such an opportunity for positive change in this country in my entire life. This is our moment, and this is our time. And I think we make a mistake if we just talk about, let's say, public safety and its racist issues. We need to recognize that there are several systems. I mean, this country was not built to ensure that women got a fair shake, and it wasn't built to ensure that people of color got a fair shake. So right now, we're focusing on criminal justice reform, which has a direct connection to homelessness as well. But we also need to look at a health system that is, Lord knows, lacking in reform. When you look at the high rates of death of Latinos, Samoans, Filipinos, and African Americans. But then you have to take it one more step and look at our education system and the way that it's funded. Automatically, individuals, depending on where you live and the color of your skin, you start already 30 yards behind everyone else. We need to change the environmental justice system. Wherever you're raised should not dictate your lifespan. We then go to the banking system, which again, during COVID, illuminated its disparities when you see that people of color and small businesses were the last ones to be able to get any kind of federal assistance. And we could go on and on and on. This is the moment. I don't think it will ever get any better. So this is probably the best time for us, people of good conscience, to work together to try to create a world that our kids and grandkids will not have to put up with a lot of the crap that many of us had to put up with. 40% of the individuals on the street, African Americans, do you think that's a coincidence? Do you think that's by accident? That's because of the system. But I do think you start with the criminal justice system. And I will say this, and it might anger a person at first, but if you think about it, the problem, if you look at elected officials like me, Reggie, the mayor, everybody, we've all introduced measures to try to ensure that there's more training for police or more discipline and this, that, or the other, but yet the system hasn't changed. That tells me that the problem is not the police per se, it is the system of policing. And this is the way that we have to think now. And if we miss this moment, in my opinion, it is criminal, because this is our shot to change the world.
And what I love about what you said, and I was initially thinking of some very specific questions around reimagining public safety as it relates to homelessness, in addition to, of course, more traditional policing around maybe violent or non-violent incidences. But what I love about this is that we're creating a precedence right now for today's conversation, and we're talking about systemic change. And I love the fact that one of the things that sort of calls to action that came from the Committee for Greater LA is the wholesale engagement of leadership across multiple different sectors. So Sarah, it seems like, you know, today's conversation in many ways can be parlayed into your work literally as we're speaking. And I did want to be able to at least allow for 1 or 2 minutes from either a question from one of our panelists or a question. I don't see too many questions yet from our guests, but if a panelist wants to chime in, we have about 1 minute or 2 for a question, or we can move forward. Any panelists have a question for either Sarah or for Council President Emeritus Wesson?
Well, okay. I'll ask the Council President a question and make Council President Emeritus a question.
Why don't you just ask Herb a question?
I'll ask Herb a question. So I love how far you're going on non-law enforcement response. And I'd love, you know, potentially an update on how that's looking. I think you've been looking at the system in Eugene, Oregon, and some other places in the United States where it works. All these systems are tied together. And so it would be helpful. You know, I feel like we'll solve homelessness if we also solve that piece. And so,
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. So let me share with you where we are. But Richard, if I just, before I get into that, 2 seconds.
Please.
And I don't, if you guys forget everything that I said, please don't forget this. The reason why we are at this great moment of change is not because of any elected official. It's because of people of all races, from New York to California, from Washington to Florida, that demanded this, led by a group called Black Lives Matter. You have teed this up, and now it's our responsibility to hit a drive down the center of the fairway. But if people ever question the power of the people, it is evident today. Now, getting to Sarah's concern, what we wanted to do was have a conversation about reimagining public safety. That is much bigger than reimagining police. It is a huge topic. And we've had 3 hearings. The individuals that introduced this reimagined motion with me being a point person. We've had 3 hearings, and there are 3 trends or 3 themes that that came out of our, what we call community conversations with the people. This was a little different than a normal hearing, a normal council meeting where people get up, they speak for 1 minute, then the next, no. When we let people speak, we asked them questions, we engaged, we had a real back and forth. So here are the 3 things. Where it relates to police, a desire to address individuals that have mental challenges differently than we do today. So there is a variety of suggestions, one of which that I know the mayor is really done a lot of work on, is trying to connect mental health professionals with our fire department to address these calls, so that you have somebody trained that can engage and maybe not escalate a situation. So people want to see a different way that we address people that have mental health issues and those with substance abuse issues as well. Another theme that has come up is, how do we use our nonprofits, in particular nonprofits that are engaged in community intervention, so that we can help clean our parks and make sure they're safe by training community people to engage with maybe some undesirable characters, and with that street cred, do it in a way that does not wind up with somebody getting hurt. And one of the central themes in every meeting was investments, investing in challenged communities. Because the communities that receive investment historically are the communities that have less crime. And when you look at our communities, they are communities that are always challenged and starving for resources. So people want to see investment in those communities. They want to see alternatives, positive alternatives for young people. So out of the conversation, those are the 3 main themes, even though there are several different approaches as to how to deal with them. And this is my favorite. Throughout this country, every 6 months or so, you'll read an article or see something on television about an individual that maybe was out and had too much Hennessy and got drunk on their ass. They kind of sort of wanted help. The police came out, there was an altercation, and a person who just literally had too much to drink is injured or killed. So some kind of trained community team that can go out in twos, where you can say, hey, here's a bottle of water. Sit down for 20 minutes, let us talk. Why don't you let me take you home? My partner is equipped to drive your car home. You then take this individual home, their car gets home, then you leave them with a court something or other, judge, that you guys help us design, that says, have your ass in court in 45 days because you were drunken in public and maybe you destroyed something or what have you. Now that person might be mad, that person might have a hangover, but that person is alive. And these are just, government has a responsibility to try to get better every day. And this is just kind of to give you a flow of what we discussed.
And I thank you so much for giving that overview, because we're going to be concluding tonight's conversation discussing reimagining public safety from a legal as well as from a legislative perspective. So I'm loving these kind of synergies and how both of you, thank you, basically provided a very sturdy platform upon which we can base and reference the rest of tonight's conversation. So thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much, Herb, for leading us and kicking us off and really setting the tone for tonight's conversation. Thank you so much. I'm going to be moving on to
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
It's always a pleasure.
Always.
Always. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much. So as we look forward to our continued collaboration to address the homelessness crisis throughout the city and the county of Los Angeles, we have to turn to one of the most immediate crises that is facing us locally and statewide, which are the wildfires. With us tonight is David Englund, COO of the American Red Cross SoCal, who will update on targeted efforts to address the unique emergency needs of the Latinx community locally and statewide, as well as other vulnerable communities. David, what is the status of the fires, and is the situation improving in any way?
Well, first, Richard, thank you for having me. It's always an honor to come and spend some time with the United Latinx Fund and the Latino Coalition of Los Angeles, especially when I get to share the Zoom stage with such amazing community leaders like the group you've assembled here today. So I appreciate the invitation back. When it comes to the wildfires, we're really in a tough situation right now. Up and down the West Coast. I mean, you've seen it on the news, really because of climate change, California, Washington, and Oregon, we're burning. The air quality in our communities has never been this bad in aggregate along the West Coast. I was fortunate to be able to travel to India a couple of years ago, and my wife and I, while we were there, kept checking the air quality because it was so bad and you could feel it in your chest. And all throughout our trip, the worst cities in the world for air quality were in India and China. I looked a couple of days ago, and the worst cities in the world for air quality were on the West Coast of the United States, even worse than India and China. So the crisis and the emergency is not only the immediate threat of the fires themselves, but it's the public health threat of the air quality and the health impacts. And so I was really pleased to hear Herb Wesson's comments, taking a global view, a broad view of what public safety means, because from a Red Cross perspective, we see the connection between climate change and public safety because it's what we experience all the time. Last night, the Red Cross housed 24,000 people who had to flee their homes either because of the wildfires on the West Coast or because of Hurricanes Laura and Hurricane Sally. We have about 5,000 Red Crossers deployed to various places around the country to providing care and comfort to people who have been displaced because of what are really climate disasters. We as a Red Cross we are in the habit of, it's our core mission of caring for and sheltering people in time of disaster. And in the past, there's been a somewhat predictable annual cycle to these things, but because of climate change, those periods of disaster have gotten longer and more intense, and this is the worst year for these kinds of disasters that we've ever seen. So it really is an emergency. In our local area, we have the Bobcat Fire, of course, in the San Gabriel foothills, and we have opened a temporary evacuation point at the Santa Anita racetrack for people in the Arcadia area and some of those other communities that have had to evacuate. But because of COVID-19, we've had to pivot and change how we operate. Historically, when there's a mass evacuation, we open mass shelters through partnerships with community rec centers, faith institutions, schools, that sort of thing, where we have a large space where we can set up cots and shelters and that sort of thing. Because of COVID-19, we've had to invent new protocols to be able to deliver our humanitarian services in a COVID-19 safe way. And what that has meant is, instead of asking people to go to a shelter or giving people the opportunity to go to a shelter, what we do is people go to a temporary evacuation point where they can immediately get care and comfort and be safe. But then we are actually housing people in hotels. And of course that increases our costs, but that's okay because our job is to take care of these folks. So instead of what we call congregate shelters, we're putting people up in hotels, and that's how we're taking care of them now. It's a whole new way of doing business. With regards to addressing the specific needs of the Latinx community, in the Los Angeles region, we actually pioneered the concept of what we call a Latino engagement team. It's been very clear over the last many years of Red Cross disaster response that as an organization, one of the areas that we needed to grow was our capability to directly engage the needs of the Latinx community around the country. And that means recruiting and training volunteers who have those bilingual skills to engage with people who may not speak English or may not speak English well enough to be able to really avail themselves of our services. But it's not just language skills, it's cultural competency. It's recruiting volunteers from the community so that the Red Cross looks like the people that we're serving, and our clients, when they look at us, we want them to see themselves, a reflection of themselves. And so those Latino engagement teams have really been critical in our ability to reach out and make sure that we're connecting with and providing that care and comfort and services to all people affected. In particular in California and also in Washington and Oregon with the wildfires, you know, we have there's a significant undocumented population, and because they're undocumented, they may not have access to certain federal resources that others might have. But the Red Cross is here to serve absolutely everybody, but not everybody knows that. So the onus is on us to do better and structure ourselves in a way that we can go into those communities, engage with them, and build those relationships and provide those services. And that's exactly what we've done. So right now we have Latino engagement team leaders from the Los Angeles Red Cross deployed to not only working here in the LA area, but we're helping our neighbors to the east in San Bernardino and Riverside with the El Dorado fire, our neighbors to the north in the Bay Area and all of the fires in Northern California, and also in Washington and Oregon, because as an organization, we recognize that was an area that we needed to grow and strengthen in order to really provide our humanitarian mission. So that work continues. When I was here last, I was able to share with you the great work that we did in partnership with LAUSD, feeding a historic number of vulnerable students when LAUSD closed down. We were able to do that because we had the luxury during the spring of it not yet being wildfire and hurricane season. But now our shift, our capacity and our focus is on dealing with the wildfires and the hurricanes, and serving people in that culturally competent manner so that every human being's needs are met in this crisis.
Dave, the thing that I always appreciate about the Red Cross is that your thinking and approach to addressing any issue is very, not only very systemic, but also very culturally competent. So for example, the way in which you're addressing both the wildfires still keeps in mind the reality of COVID, right? And still is keeping in mind in terms of social distancing, and also is keeping in mind, obviously, the way in which COVID is disproportionately impacting certain communities in terms of the way in which you're outreaching, the way in which you're communicating, the way in which your expectation around the realities that one community may be facing during a wildfire and COVID as well as versus another community that's facing certain realities during wildfires and COVID as well. So I really appreciate how you're able to sort of navigate those complex waters and be able to put together rapid, effective, impactful solutions that, I mean, I would wager that the Red Cross, particularly here in Southern California, is setting certain standards and practices that are probably beneficial to others throughout the United States, if not the world, potentially.
No, I appreciate that, Richard. In fact, you know, we in the Los Angeles region, you know, we see ourselves as the cutting edge innovators in the Red Cross. And one of the things you alluded to really speaks to the way we in LA have changed the service delivery model for the Red Cross. You know, historically, the model, like many organizations, really was the people who got served were the people who were the most vocal and had, you know, the most wherewithal in the community and connections and gave the money and those kinds of things. And that's just this human nature in some ways. But in LA, what we did was we knew that that wasn't good enough. We turned that on its head. We connected with the public health community who uses social vulnerability data. And we took that social vulnerability data, mapped it onto our hazard data and our Red Cross and FEMA and LA City and LA County service delivery data. And we identified, using data, the most socially vulnerable communities in LA County, and that's where we target our effort. So we've gone from a model that focuses services on the most vocal to a model that focuses services on the most vulnerable. And what's especially exciting about that, aside from the fact that that is the right way to deliver humanitarian services in a world of finite resources, but we're excited because the Red Cross nationally has taken notice of that, and they're taking those models and those lessons and really using it to transform how the American Red Cross does service delivery nationwide. So we really think of ourselves as pioneers here in the LA area.
And we're thankful to have you, David, and your very bright and progressive and innovative team. And as I transition to our next speaker, not only do I want to thank you, David, for providing those very valuable updates. I think last time we were primarily talking about COVID, and now we're talking about wildfires. And it wasn't even that long ago that you were on the program. So if I could encourage you, David, if at all possible, please provide any additional resources, links, flyers, whatever you would like. If you could please upload that to the chat box as we transition, because I do want to make sure that everybody here on the line can get involved in any way that you need.
Happy to do it. I'll drop a link in the chat right now.
Excellent. Thank you, David.
Thanks.
So as we move forward, let's take a look at another issue that also disproportionately impacts students of color, and that's the digital divide during the pandemic. And tonight we have Ricardo Mireles, the founder of Academia Avance Charter School. Ricardo, what has your school's efforts been to address the digital divide? How are Latinx families and other families of color adopting or not to remote learning during the current academic year? And what is, in your approximation, what do you think the long-term effects are going to be on Latinx educational attainment? Ricardo. Make sure Ricardo's unmuted.
I'm not sure if you're able to hear me. Let me just make sure. Are you able to hear me?
You're good. Very good.
Okay. Let me struggle through this. But welcome everybody. Thank you for all the hosts here for bringing us together again. This is kind of a return performance. So thanks, and I feel very honored to be with all the folks on this. I'm going to move through a list of items that seem disconnected, but I want to emphasize that they are all connected. And one common theme that we've been hearing tonight is just how COVID is amplifying issues that were already there, right? So this is COVID is a new thing, but most of these problems are not new, right? And in the case of students, and the issue I've been asked to focus on is the digital divide and how access to the internet and technology is being exacerbated by these students. It was maybe something that we kind of muddled through last April and May, but right now, if all the kids in a household, and Latinos have more kids in the household, are all trying to log on at the same time with their different teachers of their respective grades, even the fanciest of fancy houses is going to have a problem with that bandwidth to do that. So imagine if you don't have fancy bandwidth. But that's leading to learning loss, right? And so there's a lot of focus at the state level in terms of how can we make up for not just the digital divide, but the learning divide that is resulting from this. Now let me turn to some tangential issues. We're a college prep school. We are proud that we rank among the top 10% of public high schools in terms of getting kids to college from the state data. But the data that's now coming in for this fall semester is that it's almost a 10% drop in students actually going to college. The ones that got accepted, the ones that paid their deposits, they were all set to go. And COVID is for a variety of reasons that we can all imagine, holding back at least 10%. This was an article that came out, I think it was in the Washington Post yesterday, or the New York Times, forgot. But the issue is, and the majority of those kids, guess which ones? The lower income, the students of color, the ones that were the first in their family to go are now the first ones to not go. It's a big, big challenge. And that's going to spill over into this year's crop of seniors in terms of the application process, in terms of the choices that they make. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a big thought process for kids to try to convince their parents. And I don't blame the parents. Hey, I don't know if it's okay for you to go away to college, porque están bien locos, puro party, and they are getting COVID. So it's going to be a hard, this next group, this class of 2021 is facing some big issues coming from COVID. Switch here that as a school, we see that actually COVID is the bigger priority, and it's a health, the health education, the public health issues of this are actually an education task. The stigma that families are dealing with, the misinformation, the confusion, the disinformation, for people not understanding, yes, you have to wear a mask. This is why it's effective, or this is why you need to get tested. These are issues that schools are at the very front line, and not enough emphasis is being used how to use schools to address this public health crisis, right? And consider this, it is a learning issue. Fulanito cannot focus on math if he's worried that mom is isolated in the garage because she got COVID at work. They're not going to focus on history. They're not going to focus on science. We have to address the education components of this health need, and schools are ready to do that. We're just going to need some coordination. And let me go back to this issue of testing. There is a lot of conversation about how El Unified is focusing on testing, but there's more coordination that needs to happen so that more schools can test more kids. Pause here for a second. I saw a chat that maybe there's a bandwidth problem with my audio or video. I don't know, give me a thumbs up or somebody.
You're good, Ricardo.
Keep going. Okay, I'm on my last point here because there's lots of other people to speak about. But I just want to end with this piece that schools, there was the whole lead up to this moment of, are they going to open, are they not going to open? That's just kind of been amplified in concern because some counties are moving forward, San Diego and Orange County in particular. Los Angeles still has a kind of blanket order to not fully open, but the confusion is that last week the county essentially, or as of this Monday, is allowing small groups of students to come on campus with a whole bunch of provisions and precautions, and it's small groups of 12 or under. That's causing more confusion, but it's really going to come down to which parents feel safe sending their kids. And right now, from talking to another school leader, it's about 40-60. There's 40% of families saying, yeah, I got to go to work. I'm leaving my kid at home. I might as well have them interact with some teachers on campus. And 60% of parents saying, no way, my kid's in bubble wrap in the basement. So you guess which side the more impacted families are, the Latino families. And we need to provide more support for schools so that we can lessen the impacts of COVID, so that we can diminish this loss. I'll stop there, Richard.
Thank you, Ricardo. I appreciate that sort of rapid fire, to the point, illumination of multiple different issues that families are facing. And I actually would like to, if we could promote Gabriel Buena. I'm promoting him to a panelist right now, who's an LA Community College District trustee, but also Gabriel is also a former United Latinx Fund board member. And I would like for Gabriel to speak about many of the issues that you just spoke about, Ricardo, in terms of how they're addressing those challenges in the digital divide, but at the LA Community College level. And I know that they're also dealing with bandwidth issues. I know they're dealing with technology issues. Gabriel, are you on the line, and can you share a little bit about what LA Community College District is doing?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can. Proceed.
Oh, perfect. I'm at the San Francisco airport getting back to Southern Cal. So on the digital divide, the district is literally giving away 15,000 laptop computers. We've made, and just so everyone's clear, that's not an accident. We advocated for that. Many of us are very clear about the digital divide and policy initiatives with regard to that, and we have. But still, our enrollment is drastically down, around 13%. And so the digital component is just one of them. And let me just say, it's not minimal, but it's one of them. So it's, along with the devices, it's the access. So from a policy perspective, getting the California Public Utilities Commission, to advocate is one of the most important things. And one of the things that we need to talk about is actually, pushing some of our Latino elected officials specifically, and I'm only focusing on Latinos because of the topic of the event, to be more aggressive, when they're legislating on our behalf. One of the things that I can say is that, I want to see our Latino elected officials more aggressive, and challenging, the system a bit more. At LACCD, we just passed the ethnic studies resolution, which that means Black studies, not just Chicana and Chicano studies, but Central American studies, to focus on within the culinary arts program. One of the things within Latino communities that we need to really focus on is proportionality. And what do I mean by that? We're the vast majority in systems, but the systems with their jobs and leadership do not represent us in vice president jobs, in dean jobs, in a lot of those jobs. And we have to actively, let me give you an example. There is a position at East Los Angeles College in the Chicano Studies Department focusing on LGBT that the committee at ELAC didn't choose to, for a full-time funding position. So there's a lot of, another example, Latino enrollment is down. Now, a lot of people choose to use, the term Latino because it tends to be kind of this vanilla term, but there's a lot of communities and Latino communities that are indigenous and do not speak Spanish, who speak indigenous languages, that outreach. So I challenge us to move beyond just, again, this very, generic Latinoism, to really understand the diversity of our communities. I'll give you another example. Our culinary programs, we have 3 culinary programs. None of them teach, cooking Mexican food, Central American foods. They don't teach those. Why not? So Ricardo, you do a great job, and we always challenge each other, right, Ricardo? So one of the things that I challenge our partners in the charter schools and in the community and the unifieds is to, again, bring in Chicano studies and Central American studies into the K-12, but really, again, look, our our teachers and our faculty, specifically our Latino faculty, are not advocating strongly, and a lot of them tell me that they're afraid to, they're afraid to speak up. I can't hear you.
Oh no, I was just Gabriel. I was just saying that no, that you're speaking. No, you're speaking. I love everything that you're saying, and I love the passion. And you're talking about.
I thought you were on mute.
No, you're talking about advocacy, and you're talking about championing. And I do need to pivot just because of time. Speaking of advocacy, and speaking of championing, and speaking of ensuring that our community is at the table, ready to vocalize our needs, and also be able to secure leadership. We have, I'm going to pivot to the next topic around Census 2020. I'd like to introduce Adan Chavez, the Deputy Director of the National Census Program for NALEO. Adan, how are the census numbers looking at this critical time, and how can community and nonprofits and LA Community College District and electeds and everybody on this call get involved? Adan, take it away.
Of course. Thank you so much, Richard. And first and foremost, let me say thank you again to the United Latinx Fund for bringing us all together, and to all the speakers, the esteemed speakers we have here in this very important conversation today. So the census is one of those things that is also under crisis. Even long before COVID, there were so many different things that were already negatively impacting the census. Many years of underfunding, canceled test after test, and so many operations that were changed on a last minute basis had already put the census behind. Now, you have to consider that we are all expected to get out the count in the middle of a pandemic. And our job at the NALEO Educational Fund is, of course, to work towards a full and accurate count of Latinos. But we also need to remember that Latinos have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. Right now, what is top of mind in our community is to make sure there is food on the table, a roof over their heads. And so the census isn't necessarily something that is currently taking up their headspace. But I think that now more than ever, things like the census are so critical. We can't talk about any of the issues we've spoken about today if we don't think about the tie the census has to them. One, it's precisely in moments like this that our elected officials need resources and data on our community to be able to respond to public health crises like this one. And when it comes to things like homelessness, education, public safety, we need numbers about who is in our community to see whether or not people are negatively impacted by policies, and what policies gap exists so that we can better advocate for Latinos in all kinds of vulnerable communities. And so last time we spoke to you, we were about 2 months away from the initial census deadline. That of course has changed, which means that all of us are running around in what is now going to be a shortcutted non-response follow-up operation, which is the most important operation to get us to 100%. And now we have less than 2 weeks to essentially make sure we're able to get to 100% so that everybody in our community is counted. In California, over 68% of households have responded, which means that we have a lot to go to get to that 100%. In LA County as a whole is lagging behind at 63.7% participation, which means that we have a long way to go within the next couple of days to ensure that everybody in our community is counted. So here's what we've been doing, and here's what everybody can do. One, just recently we released a new video with Broadway talent where we have actresses and actors in a fun TikTok inspired way, run us through the census questionnaire, because we still are seeing a lot of questions and concerns around our community, whether or not the census is safe, which of course we all know it is, what's going to be asked on the census questionnaire, and how to complete that questionnaire. Two, we're also launching this Latino Month of Action. Today is Citizenship Day, and so we're doing a big push to encourage eligible Latinos to become citizens. Next week is National Voter Registration Day, so our push is going to be to encourage eligible citizens to register to vote. And of course, we have a last census push the last week of September. So now people's door-to-door efforts have had to been short, but this still means that we can pick up a phone a friend, text a friend, get the word out there on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, pick up the phone and ask somebody else if they need any help filling out their census questionnaire. There are so many things that we can be doing right now. And while us as nonprofit organizations can be trying our very best to get the word out on census, the most effective messengers are actually community members themselves. Tías, tíos, primos, primas, abuelas, abuelos. So if you haven't filled out your form, there are 3 different ways to do it. Folks can fill it out online at my2020census.gov. Folks can also call the Bureau or send their paper questionnaire back to the Bureau. And you do have a couple of days. Do not wait, to what you can do. Do not save what you can do tomorrow if you can do it today. And again, please respond. This is going to really set the way for future generations to come. This is how our community can benefit from billions of dollars worth of federal resources. And this is how we can get political power. And it's another way to really raise our voice in moments like this one. So thank you again, Richard. Happy to take any questions, and we appreciate you having us.
Absolutely, Adan. Thank you so much for being able to be succinct and using the very time wisely. And Adan, I really encourage you to please, please, please share any and all resources on the chat box, because I want to make sure that we can all support your work and promote it across our networks. And finally, a topic that merits immediate attention regarding protecting the safety of our Black and Brown communities. Specifically, I'm speaking about reimagining public safety, recent police-involved shootings, as well as unarmed crisis response. So with us tonight, we have Reggie Jones-Sawyer, Assembly Member of the 59th District, George Gascon, former San Francisco District Attorney, as well as Los Angeles candidate for District Attorney, as well as Rupert A. Birdsong, LA Superior Court Judge. As well as, I'd like to introduce Raul Claros, the founder of the Latino Coalition of Los Angeles, who will be facilitating tonight's conversation. Raul, please take it away, and we'll begin with our Assembly Member, Reggie Jones-Sawyer.
All right, good evening. But did Raul want to talk first, or should I just jump right in?
No, if you don't mind, Reggie, what I want to just kind of lay out is to both you, Mr. Gascon, as well as the Honorable Judge Birdsong, just read the pulse right now, right? Where we're at right now. We've been dealing with the murder of Dijon Kingsley down in South LA. We've had the ambush that's happened to the sheriff's officers. There's been a whole lot of protesting going on in the streets, and each one of you have your own perspectives, whether they be legal or legislatively. But also, I want to start off with you, Assembly Member. You even had a personal encounter that you've been going through, that's been on the news over the last 24 hours as a result of a lot of this hostility that's going on. So, Assembly Member, if you can give us your perspective on all these different moving pieces that ultimately comes down to quality of life and public safety in the County of Los Angeles.
Well, thank you, Raul. And the reason I have the jails in back of me, because I've spent the last 8 years trying to empty them with Black and Latino, mostly male, from our community. Get them back in our community, educated, retrained, get them off drugs, and get them put a target, a literal target on my face. The target you use when you go to guns, which was very disturbing because it came from the prison guard. I know my work has been disturbing, but it's something I'm going to continue to do. I've called for security for my family because you never know who may want to do something serious and try to use that target as something against me. They have not apologized for it. In fact, they want to double down and do even more for my opponent, who hasn't spoken out about it. If you were to see the video where they talk about going back to the future, going back to 3 strikes, going back to eliminated Prop 4757, going back. I mean, I had to remind them that marijuana is no longer illegal. You can't arrest anybody for it and throw them in jail permanently anymore. Because the public.
I think we lost a little of your connection there, Assembly Member, but I definitely hear you when you say that this is something now that's become very personal.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can you try that again? Yeah, you're sounding a little spotty, at least to me. But again, I want to acknowledge the fact that this is now not something that's just become a legal matter or a legislative issue to you, but something that's very personal. And I definitely want to make sure that your connection gets back up and running so that you can finish your thought. And so, Mr. Gascon, if you can shine some light on your experience and your work right now around the clock on these issues.
Well, I think as you know, or some of you know, police unions are pouring millions of dollars against me. They pour about $2.2 million in the primary, and now they're going to put around $4 or $5 million in the general. And by the way, most of the money is going to come in the last 15 days or so, because they know that if they put too much money early, that will be a tool that we would use against them. So they're slowly rolling out the money. But the reason why they're doing it is because they know that, you know, I would be looking at the work very differently. I think that, as Roger talked about, you know, the attempt to undo Prop 47, since I was one of the co-authors of Prop 47, this is part of my life work, so I take this very seriously. So I'm working very aggressively against Prop 20, as well as my own race. But I think, you know, I wanted to address also an issue that I think is critically important that we do, because we had the shooting of the two deputies, but we've had a lot of men, primarily men of color, you know, obviously some women too, but mostly men of color, that continue to be killed in conditions that are very questionable. And all of a sudden we have this anger about, you know, the shooting of the deputies, which, by the way, I condemn. You know, it's important to condemn all forms of violence, but I think it's really important to be clear that when we start distinguishing the value of life, depending on who you are, it's a real problem for us, right? And I'm seeing now people, and I see very incendiary language being used by people in public offices about, you know, the horror of this deputy being shot, which it is. But I don't see the same level of passion when we have young African Americans that are unarmed that are being shot and killed by police. And I think that we have to ensure, or Latinos, we have to ensure that we bring to the forefront that, you know, violence in all forms is unacceptable. But if we're going to be passionate and we're going to be talking the way that we have been talking the last few days, we need to do the same thing when members of our community are being killed in very questionable conditions. And I believe that really is going to have to come from leadership too, right? And if we don't, we continue to lose the legitimacy of the system. You know, the reason why we have people protesting out there every day is because they don't believe that the system can work for them. And every turn of the way, we keep doing things that support that belief, right? Two deputies get shot, you know, the president calls, the vice president calls, hundreds of thousands of dollars are being pouring in. A young black male gets shot riding his bike and just really trying to get away. And a small group of people are demonstrating in South LA. And there is no official condemnation. The district attorney, when asked about the shooting, says, well, it's under investigation. But when a police officer got shot, she doesn't stop and say, well, it's under investigation. You know, we don't know what else happened, right? So I think it's really critical that we stop devaluing some lives and increasing the value of other lives based in, you know, their economic status or their social or the organization that they belong to. Because if we don't, we're going to continue to have major problems with legitimacy in the system. I think most of you know that I have been working really hard in this campaign, but I've been working really hard for years, and Reggie knows that I've been working very aggressively for many years to reduce incarceration, not only through Prop 47, but Prop 57, Prop 64, automatic expungement of records, going after police criminal behavior, at the same time showing that you can reduce incarceration and make our communities safe. So we're at a critical moment, and I think it's really important that we all come together to try to bring us together where we can, but we cannot just stand on the sidelines and allow some of the language that I've seen in the last 2 or 3 days, which now, Reggie, apparently you're being targeted as well, and not, allow that to be the only conversation when we're talking about violence, and letting all the things that are going on by every day, not having the same level of official anger and passion.
Thank you, Mr. Gascon. And I say amen because I felt like you were just preaching to a sermon to Black and brown men, to Black and brown families, because that's exactly the discussion at a community level, from household to household, from block to block, that Black, brown, and Indigenous families have been having since last Saturday. Many of us that are on this call were out at the protest, peacefully marching and protesting on Saturday, and we had sniper rifles pointed at us while we had little girls on skates blowing bubbles, and had a multicultural, multi-generational representation of saying, that's enough. We're tired of being at these marches and at these different protests, for another name that's been added. And we were protesting the sheriff specifically on their laundry list of murders since George Floyd. So we're being very specific and very intentional. So thank you for your words, Mr. Gascon. And I think that's a great segue when we're talking about the judicial system, as a man of color, as a Black man, but also as a judge, Your Honor, Birdsong. Can you give us, your perspective and views of all the recent, unfortunate violence?
Well, if you recall back in, 92, when the riots broke out, this was after the verdicts came in and the officers who beat up Rodney King were acquitted. But you also have to remember, around the same time was when Latasha Harlins was killed, and her shooter got 6 months probation. So it's not the violence that's in the community that's causing people to be upset and protest. I think Mr. Gascon said it, is the lack of accountability, the lack of no one doing anything about what's happening. That's what people are very, very frustrated about. What we're trying to do, in my capacity as chair of the task force on the elimination of bias and inequality in the justice system, we're launching a campaign to reach out to all 58 counties and all of the presiding judges in the state to make sure that they have various things in place with regard to training on implicit bias. Because you have to understand, when we're talking about somebody that goes from the street to jail, you basically have 3 layers of interaction with the system before they can get all the way into the prison. First, you have the interaction with the officers on the street. Now, if they're not trained to see people of color as human, if they exercise their law enforcement powers to single out and target people of color, obviously that's a problem. Then you go to the second layer, which is at the prosecution level, DAs or the city attorneys. They have, frankly, a lot of discretion with regard to seeing what the officers saw in the field and make a determination as to whether this case should proceed to somebody like me. Now, I think I talked about this the last time, when sometimes I would see some cases and then I would wonder, why are they prosecuting this? What is really going on? And so then the third layer obviously is someone like me. If you have a person who is going to be empathetic and understands that, you know, sometimes it's not so black and white with regard to whether someone has committed a crime or not. And for example, the young man in Atlanta, when he had the confrontation and got shot at the Wendy's parking lot. I don't know if anyone saw that video.
Yes, we remember.
This man was basically pleading with the officer, says, look, I'm just around the corner, okay? I admit I had a few drinks. Just let me go over it and walk home. He's not going to be of any danger. Let me walk home and I can sleep it off. I'll come back and get my car. Now, he could have done that. He could have cited him. He had his information. If he wanted to arrest him later for public drunkenness or whatever, he could have done all of that without the altercation of, now I basically have gotten him, by agitating the situation, I've gotten him to more or less admit to, well, that's kind of fudge, but got him to talk about, well, I'm going to arrest you. And now it's to a point where they get into a physical altercation, tasers employed, and ultimately he gets shot. Versus let the man go home, sleep it off, a life is preserved. And the officer now has more credibility in the community by doing what we want to consider as community policing. Look, the police are there to protect people the police don't actually deal with crime, they deal with enforcement of laws. You can enforce the law by making sure this person gets home safely and he's not driving, and yet you don't have that altercation, you don't have a life lost.
And Your Honor, if you don't mind me, interrupting, I think a lot of what you're highlighting, Herb Wesson talked about in his opening remarks. I know he was talking about, reimagining the approach to responding to issues with our homeless community and homeless neighbors. But he also talked about that specific issue about somebody being pulled over, having an unarmed response unit coming out and just getting that individual home, and then dealing with the law, to your point, at a later time at a scheduled court hearing. I know that we are running up against time, and we can be talking about a lot of these issues for many more hours, to come. But with this, I want to be able to toss this back over to Richard to see if he has any last questions for our panelists. And if there's any other questions from our audience, please use the chat box, because I know that we're going to be able to go into a Q&A with some of our panelists. Richard?
Yeah, what I was going to do is we only have about maybe 10 minutes left. What I was going to do is, if I could, or for Shad, if you could promote all of our attendees as panelists so that they could engage with the remaining guests and be able to speak to them directly. I'm unfortunately not able to do that, but while I wait for Rashad or Jake, if you could assist me with that, that would be great. The only thing that I wanted to talk about is all of you are impacted by this, something that has always existed, right? This has always existed ever since we were kids. It is something that has impacted all of us, right, in various ways, and our families in various ways, and it's intergenerational.
Richard,
right?
It's existed since the formation of this country. If you want to talk about the legal documents and talk about the legal formation of this country, it's existed from the beginning.
Therefore, we started this conversation today talking about systems change. We talked about the report on the Committee for Greater LA. We talked about Herb's thinking and really thinking about this present moment. But then I'm also seeing it's to me, it's sort of like it's the darkest hour before the light emerges, right? And then we even have an assemblyman here who is literally being targeted, right? We have folks that are being murdered, and it's been going on for generations. So my question to you is, obviously I'm sort of stating the obvious here, but my question to you is, how is it that we ensure, based upon what the Councilman Wesson was saying, how do we ensure that we do not let this moment pass? Because I think in our recent history, there's few and far between our moments like these. So and I don't have an answer. I'm wondering what you all think. How do we ensure that we do not let this moment pass, and that we capitalize it in the way systemically that it requires, that it merits?
It starts with individual courage, I think, Richard. We have to speak up. We have to speak out. We cannot remain silent when these things are happening. You literally have to be blind, deaf, and dumb to not conclude that there are some problems which need to be addressed. And I think it's something even more significant than legal. We're talking about humanity. We're talking about human values, about recognizing people of color as humans. When we start there, the interaction is different. When we start there, the treatment of what they have done is different. So we're still trying to overcome that. So we really have to start seeing people as people. Just because we look differently, just because we have different skin tones, we're still people. If we can start there, then maybe everyone can start getting the benefit of the doubt. But it has to start with courage, individual courage to speak up. We can't be silent anymore.
And I know it's hard. Excuse me, I had something in my throat. As an individual who has literally been targeted, and who's literally having people basically say, come take this person out by putting a target on their back. It's not easy. I have a family. I've asked for extra security because the prison guards have basically threatened me and anybody near me. That is unacceptable. Not only should we speak out against that, we should continue to encourage others. The reason why some of this stuff slowed up is because they killed our heroes. Robert Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. They went after the people that wanted to make systemic changes. And it kind of slowed us up a little bit, but the concept, the idea of freedoms, voting rights acts, reforming of police, those ideas continue. And like I tell people, you may take me out. You may take this vessel that God has given me, but the movement will not stop. And that's what you got to remind people, that this is a movement that will never stop and that they need to catch up to what's happening now. I know the prison guards want to go back to when we had 3 strikes and all of that, and to a day when they filled all the prisons, but that's not what the people want. And so we've got to, and I admire the judge for saying it, but we and George, we all know we're the standard bearers. We're the ones that got to speak out against it. And it is not easy. It is not easy. That means you're risking maybe your livelihood. You're missing maybe a nice little title, but most important, you may be risking your life. And we need more warriors like that who are able to move forward and protect not only African-American, but Latino, poor. We need an advocate for the homeless, people that will give up everything to make sure that we right this wrong right now. And they are out there. We just need to breathe them more and have them be able to hear their voices, because now is that time.
Mr. Gascon.
Yeah, and Reggie, by the way, I'm going to call you later on because I want to get some more details. I want to see what we can do social media-wise and otherwise. But the problem that we have is, and I appreciate, Judge Burson talking about courage, because it is about courage, but there's a huge lack of courage when it comes to elected officials, right? And I hate to sound critical, but Prop 47, for instance, was the result of a lack of courage in Sacramento. And there is so much that needs to be done. And I look at just the last legislative season, and we have major police reform that needed to pass, and it died. And really straightforward stuff. I mean, simple things like decertification, right? You got fired from a police department. My God, you should never be a cop anywhere else, right? How can that be wrong? But yeah, it didn't pass, right? We continue to see police money corrupting our political system. We continue to see prison guard money corrupting our political system. I know some people say, well, it's easy for you to say because they're attacking you. But you know what? The problem is that if we don't all stand up together, they come after us one at a time. So I can tell you something, Brother Reggie, that I'm going to be standing up with you, man. And I want to get more details because I'm going to be very public about it by tomorrow. Because that is unacceptable that a legislator will get targeted by public servants, people that are being paid with a public dollar. And they're probably using public time to do this, right? Which makes it even more problematic. So, but, you know, unless we stand up and unless, you know, we all are willing to take those political bullets or, you know, sometimes, unfortunately, maybe even more than that, we all fall one at a time, you know? And it's just no other way to get around it.
I'm really thankful that we've made some connections tonight. Because for me, at the end of the day, that's the most valuable piece. I want to let you all know that unfortunately we have literally only 3 minutes, and we will get kicked off at 7 o'clock by another group that is using this. So I'm going to open it up to everybody. I'm going to say one last thing. I want you to note that I noticed, and it was just as luck of the draw, statistics, probability, that tonight's conversation was very heavily male centered and dominated. I want you to know that next week's conversation is the opposite. It's just the way that the people's availability played out. There was no intention behind it, but that's just how it was. So I just want to let you know that I noticed. So anyway, any questions in our last few minutes from anybody? I feel like Genevieve might want to say something. Genevieve, you're unmuted.
Thank you for this. This was a really action-packed, huge program. I got a lot out of it, even though I got kicked out for a few minutes. Yeah, I'm interested. I lost all the stuff that was in the chat before I get kicked out, so I don't have those videos. I also wanted to let Ricardo know that I'm been doing some trying to do some fundraising for bridging the digital divide for Academia Avance, and I'd love to connect and get more information on where that stands. And and thank you for posting that report. I'm going to try to grab that real quick. But yeah, please reach out to me. I'm super duper busy with Westside Food Bank work and coalition work, but I want to help in whatever way I can. And I'll just type my email in here.
Tina Diaz is someone who I invited to participate. Tina, I was just wondering if you can hear us. Do you have any questions, comments, or feedback?
I've loved this. It's been awesome. I guess, okay, I'm going to totally go a different way. Obviously, there's a lot going on, and I would just love to hear what brings you joy right now. Because I think that joy and rest are so important in all of this, and that's something I personally struggle with sometimes. What brings you joy? Anyone who wants to answer that.
Well, I mean, I can jump there, and this might sound a little corny, but you know, I get joy out of number one, the work, because I feel that there is a moment and there's a mission that we accomplish. But you know, I get joy out of just spending time with family, cooking, walking. You know, when I mean, I've been Zoom today since 8 o'clock in the morning. As soon as I get done here, my wife and I are going to put some tacos together, and we're going to walk and eat while we walk. You know, so I think just look for the things that make you feel good, and just don't forget to do that. You know, don't forget to to look at what's really important in life.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate this.
Thank you.
No,
Thank you, everyone.
absolutely. See you next Thursday. We're going to do it all over again with another star-studded panel and a whole nother set of topics. So stay tuned.